Come on in, pull up a chair, take a load off, because today I will be reviewing and paging through Mythic Odysseys of Theros for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons from Wizards of the Coast. So is this a must-have setting book to add to your collection for 5e D&D, or is this an Odyssey that you can safely pass on? Well, you are going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back once again as your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, I will be reviewing Mythic Odysseys of Theros for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons in just a moment. Do want to remind you, if you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't. And if you do subscribe, ring that little notification bell, because it will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also remind you when my live stream, The Daily Dope, airs right here on YouTube, Monday through Thursday nights, with the latest in tabletop gaming news. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, comics, movies, TV. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. As I pointed out, today I am reviewing Mythic Odysseys of Theros for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. This is from Wizards of the Coast. Do want to mention, digitally, this has been out for a while. It has been out for at least a month. I think it's a little more than a month from Wizards of the Coast. It has been available digitally at D&D Beyond, Fantasy Grounds, as well as Roll20. This hardcover book is not out yet. It will not hit stores until July 21st. It is going to carry an MSRP of $49.95. So let's swing on over to the other camera and we will dive on in, because here we've got Mythic Odysseys of Theros. I already have put together a pretty detailed page through where we look at everything in the book. So if you'd like, by all means, I will throw up a little card for you to click on that if you want to get a good look at everything. I am going to actually kind of zip through this relatively quickly, hoping to maybe put together this review in about 15 minutes or so. Yeah, I know. I tend to carry on a little bit. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Theros like I was, it is a setting for Magic the Gathering, which is, of course, also from Wizards of the Coast. It has a very, very heavy Greek and Roman mythology vibe to it. So, as I mentioned in the page through, I play Magic the Gathering a good amount, but I don't really delve into the lore much. So all of this was brand new to me. So I thought that was pretty cool. There are things I really do like about this book. There are other things that I think are pretty weak about this book, and I will talk about each of those as we kind of fly on through here. So, as I mentioned, the setting of Theros is very heavily influenced by Greek mythology. Now, we don't have the same deities as we do for the Greek and Roman mythology, but there is that whole essence of the gods do really have a lot to do with the populace. You see them a lot. You can see them in the skies. They really are embedded in the society of Theros, which I think is pretty cool. That is pretty different than our usual standard D&D fare, where the deities themselves are pretty distant. They're, I guess, good term would be standoffish. One aspect I do like about the setting too is, and this draws from a lot of various different fiction, but give you a great example, like recently American Gods, well, or at least Neil Gaiman's TV series is recent. The book itself has been out for a long, long time. But these these deities, the more people believe in them, the more powerful they are. The less belief, then the weaker they are. So very interesting as far as that. Now, there is some player-facing info here. We have some player options. One of the cool aspects of Theros is the player characters are kind of handpicked by the gods. They have been touched by the gods. So if you are playing Dungeons and Dragons and you're kind of like, well, I'd like to be Jason with my Argonauts, or maybe I want to be Theseus or Perseus. Those are the kind of heroes the player characters are going to be. This is a very epic setting, and the heroes are going to be the legends. And this starts off kind of right at first level. So if you think of regular 5th edition D&D, the characters are already beyond the average person's abilities. This is actually multiplied. So we do have some different races that are available. We've got some new races here. So we've got the Centaur, we've got the Leonin, which are the lion people of Magic the Gathering, which I think are very cool. Okay, so I'll be honest. I usually play a white-green deck, and yes, I do have Leonin in my decks almost all the time. We do have the Minotaur. We've got satyrs as well. So we've got some new races that you can play. They are pretty interesting. Out of the bunch, I think, in my opinion, I think that the two coolest are the Leonin and the Triton. I think the Triton are pretty cool as well. We've got some subclasses. We don't have any sub-races, though. So I was kind of surprised by that. We do have some subclasses. We're going to have one background, which is the athlete. Once again, kind of surprised that we only have one additional background here for the players, and it's an athlete. It's effectively an Olympian. And that is kind of all the player-facing character info and options here. I have to admit, I found Mythic Odysseys of Theros pretty weak as far as the player options that are available. Now, let's flip that coin, because one of the really cool aspects of this source book is the various different deities. So we go into a lot of detail about 15 different gods, and your player characters can worship these gods. They can become champions of these gods. Effectively, they are champions of these gods. And we get a lot of great detail about each of these deities. Once again, I'm going to say this a few times. I'll try not to repeat myself a lot on this, but reading through this, you really do get the whole Greek mythology influence going on here with what we're going to get into the underworld, and that's pretty interesting as well. So we've got the various different deities. One thing I will mention about the book that I'm not overly keen on is I think there's too much focus on the 15 different deities, because not only do we have this section here discussing each of them in detail, we're going to have another section going into further detail about them. Although there is some information in the next, well, it's not exactly next, but this other section about the deities that I think is pretty interesting, especially using them as villains in your campaign, because that is one of the aspects of mythology that I always have found interesting, and not just Greek and Roman, but even Hindu mythology and Norse mythology, even Egyptian mythology. You don't necessarily have gods who are just, they're only good or they're only evil. They have a lot of shades of gray, and they have a lot of positive and negative aspects to them. And that is also sort of how these deities are set up as well. So I do definitely like that. So then we're going to get into a bit of a gazetteer, but not a lot. There is not a ton of information about Theros in the book as far as the land itself, which, once again, I think that's one of the weaker areas of the book. I will mention that everything is pretty succinct and to the point, which I do appreciate, especially as someone who's a game master. I like to know, I like little blocks of information. I don't need info dumps because I don't want to lay that on my players either. So we get a few pages of the gazetteer. The returned are very cool. The realms of the returned. So the returns are basically the dead who have come back. They've kind of clawed their way back to the land of the living. They're not undead. They're not zombies or anything like that. So I thought that was kind of cool. And we'll get into a bit more detail about that as well. We have a section about creating adventures in Theros set in this, and it kind of explains, okay, so this is a much more epic setting than your standard Forgotten Realms. That your player characters are not just going to be heroes, they are going to be legendary as the game progresses. So we've got divine intervention, as I mentioned before. We've got the deities who are going to actually have a lot to do with the various different player characters. They will be involved in their day-to-day lives. So now we start getting into the deities once again and using, for an example, champions, villains, using that deity as a villain, different schemes they might have. I thought this is pretty interesting. But once again, I think there's just a little too much focus on the gods of Theros as opposed to the monsters, the magical items. You're going to see that in a moment as well. But we're going to go through all 15 of these deities. And once again, every section is going to get the champions, villains, using them as villains in your campaign, different schemes, different temple layouts. I do like the maps. I love the artwork throughout. I think the artwork's fantastic, and it's very consistent throughout the book as well. So I do appreciate that. Also, you are getting a lot of gaming content. Even though there are some directions I probably would have rather seen this book go in, or included more information about some things and less information about other things, the presentation is really, really nicely done. All right, so we're just going to flip on through these really quickly. The different deities are very interesting. I do like them as well. And as I mentioned, they're not just, mustache twirling villains or anything like that. There is complexity to these gods. There is also a introductory adventure included in the source book. We'll get to that in just a moment. But as I mentioned, there is just, look at the page count that we've seen so far. And we're not even done with this second section for the various different deities. But you can see, even up to this point, a good 2/3 of the page count has been devoted to the deities, to the gods of Theros. And continuing along, it's good info. I will admit, it's some good information. Like I said, I'm going to stop harping on this, but I think there's too much focus on the deities. All right, so then we get into, this is more some GM, Dungeon Master facing material here with the various different adventures. Because it is drawing so much influence from Greek mythology, of course, you will take to the seas. So we do have different water adventures, underwater adventures. Then we get the short introductory adventure. Jeez, I need a sip here. It is super humid today here in the Chicago area. This is it's a July afternoon. If you watch the channel at all, you know I normally do not wear t-shirts for my videos, but it is so humid, especially down here in the duct tape studios, which is usually dry. So this is actually a pretty good adventure. It's got some meat on its bones. It's not super short. It is certainly not the sort of adventure that you're going to finish up within 1 or 2 settings. I would say you're probably looking at about 3 sessions to wrap this up. So now we're going to get into treasures, and this is another section I think is very weak as far as the setting book. There are 8 treasures, and sort of like a couple of them, they're kind of meh. And then we have artifacts of the gods, which are pretty cool. Only thing is, we really don't get information about every single deity's artifacts. It's like, okay. So sort of like, all right, maybe could have included some of that and said there's just a handful of them. All right, then we get into some of the different creatures. We talk about some of the classic monsters. We're talking about how in this setting, how some of the classic monsters are a bit different. They're utilized differently. We'll also talk about mythic, I should say, monsters, epic monsters. Yes, I know Beowulf, as an example, is not mythology per se, but think of some of these mythic monsters along the lines of like Grendel. Well, we get a nice bestiary with some additional creatures. The Colossus of Akros, which in the setting, Akros seems to be kind of the Athens of the setting. But we had some cool stuff. We had some cool monsters here. I don't really have any complaints. I think this is more of a highlight of the setting book. The monsters themselves, the creatures that are included. So here's another aspect. So we get hoplites as we get stat blocks for hoplites. I'm really surprised one of the backgrounds that could have been included easily into this, because remember, I mentioned there's only one new background, and it's the athlete. I think hoplite background would have been perfect. I don't know. So we got some hydras, good old Hercules. So we've got the Leonin as NPCs. So we get a good number of creatures, both the new and old. Some of the classics are tweaked a bit for the setting as well. Here we get some more info about the Returned. I do definitely like these NPCs, because they're not monsters, but I think it's pretty cool. I would like to utilize something like this in a fantasy role-playing game, and I think that's really where this setting book kind of comes into play. There's a lot of good stuff in here that you can just take and utilize for your 5e adventures. I don't think that this book really makes it as a complete setting book. That's kind of the problem. So here we've got some of the mythic monsters here. And then the book kind of abruptly comes to an end. Boom. Just like so. All right. So, and it clocks in at 256 pages. So let's swing on over to the other camera. I'll share my final thoughts and give this a review score. As I mentioned, there's stuff I like about the book. There's things I do like about the book. There's some things I think are really weak about Mythic Odysseys of Theros. First of all, as a setting itself, I got to be honest. I mean, outside of like the deities and how they take part in the actual world, the world, living world that's going on. They're not just some, ancient books that are written up about these deities, and nobody's ever seen them, and it's just worshiping, empty promises, I guess we could say. Outside of like a lot of the deity information, it falls kind of flat. It really does. As far as a setting, could I take this book and say, okay, now I really understand this whole Theros setting for Magic the Gathering? No, I can't. I don't know how people who are big fans of the lore for Magic the Gathering will take to this book either, because they might feel kind of cheated that maybe there would be a lot more information about the actual setting itself. Really not. So there's a lot of good information if you want to like steal some deities. If you want to take your games in more of an epic mythological kind of vein, take it down that avenue. There's good information in that as well. It's very weak as far as, in my opinion, as far as player options and treasures. It does have a pretty good bestiary as well. The starting adventure, the introductory adventure is pretty good. So all in all, this isn't a bad book. This isn't a terrible book. I would have honestly liked to have seen an adventure book rather than another Magic the Gathering setting. And I'm sure there are a lot of Dungeons and Dragons players out there and dungeon masters out there who would have liked to have seen, if they were getting a setting book, something along the lines of Planescape or Dark Sun or Spelljammer or any number of classic settings, as opposed to another Magic the Gathering setting book. And I understand where Hasbro's coming from. They know what side their bread is buttered on. So I'm not complaining about that. I think the book is useful. I don't think it's a must buy by any stretch of the imagination. If you like your Forgotten Realms sort of adventures and the player characters being heroes, but as they level up, they become more powerful. And they're not necessarily kind of like semi demigods, is what I was saying in the first look video. If you like, you're setting more traditional as a D&D game, this is kind of a deities and demigods kind of book, where I think that the deities that are included are pretty cool. All that information is very cool. Steal that, use that. But overall, I just think the book is good. I enjoyed reading it. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say I'm going to give Mythic Odysseys of Theros a 7 out of 10. It's worth a purchase. Might be, well, I was going to say might be better served picking it up digitally, but I think the digital services charge about the same amount. I think Fantasy Grounds, it's usually about half that price. But this is hitting stores on July 21st. If you really want to bring more of a mythological kind of flavor to your 5e games, then I would say pick this up. If not, if you really don't have any interest, maybe get it, maybe not. All right, that is it for this time out. As I like to remind people, if you like this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell, because it will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also tell you when my live stream, The Daily Dope, airs right here on YouTube, Monday through Thursday nights, with the latest in tabletop gaming news. And of course, when you're not watching videos here on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. All right, that's it. I will be back next time. And of course, as I've been signing out during this time of pandemic, please do your best to be smart, stay safe. I'll see you next time.
Oh, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. And of course, if you want to catch up on past episodes of The Daily Dope, check out this playlist. And if you'd like to see what YouTube's recommending you take a peek at from the channel, just give a click right over here. Of course, I'm Jeff McAleer, and once again, thank you very much for watching.